Today I'm going to show you why you should ever defend yourself and what to do instead. You ever notice how fast we jump into defense mode? Someone questions your stand and suddenly your heart's pounding, your mouth opens, and you're trying to explain your way out of something that wasn't even your fault. You didn't do anything wrong, but here you are defending your tone, your timing, your choices. And if you have ever walked away from one of those conversations thinking, why did I even say all that? You're not alone, we do it because it's natural. You're not alone. We have been taught not directly, but through years of subtle messaging thread to be good, to be understood, to be respectable. We have to explain ourselves that the more someone pushes, the more we have to justify. But here's the problem with that. When you defend yourself, you're not operating from your center. You're reacting, and reaction is never rooted in power. It's just rooted in panic because when you react, you are responding to their energy, not your own. You are responding to how they feel, what they said, and how they frame the situation. The moment someone comes at you with criticism, with suspicion, with attitude, and you jump into defense mode, you have already handed them the steering wheel. You let them drive the direction of the conversation. And most of the time, they are not even qualified to be in the driver's seat. See, when someone says something that feels like an attack, the goal isn't always clarity. The control, it's not always about solving the issue. Sometimes it's about shifting pressure. So the second you start defending yourself, you are telling them of yes, I accept the premise, I accept that I am on trial here. And once you are on trial, there is only one possible outcome. You either prove your case or you get judged. And even if you win, you lose. Why? Because now you are exhausted. Now you have spent emotional energy arguing a point you never needed to prove in the first place. Let me give you a real world example. You are at work, you miss a deadline by a couple of hours, not days, just hours. Your manager comes in hot. Why wasn't this in on time? This is unacceptable. Immediately, your brain says, explain, justify, defend. And maybe you do. I had two other reports. The system was down. I even stayed late last night. But notice something. Your defense didn't calm the situation. It didn't lead to understanding. It just deepened the tension. Why? Because you responded to their urgency with panic instead of presence now. Imagine a different response. Unrooted in calm, same situation. But instead of explaining, you say, I hear your concern. I'm making sure it doesn't happen again. That's it. That's control. That's present. That's your thing staying rooted. No panic, no explanation. Just ownership of the moment on your terms. See, reacting is emotional. Responding is intentional. And that's the different ends. Because if you always react, you will always feel like you are one step behind. You are cleaning up after conversation instead of leading them. And let me tell you, then you live your life on defense. It's exhausting. It's like trying to walk through your day. With your face up, you can't live like that for long. Now, this doesn't mean you become cold or silent or unfeeling. This isn't about shutting down. It's about knowing that not every question deserves an answer. Not every question deserves a counterpoint. Not every raised voice requires your voice to rise with it. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stay quiet for a beat, breathe, and ask yourself, is this my energy for theirs? If it's not your, don't pick it up. Don't carry it, don't transfer it. Because when you react, you serve the moment. But when you respond, you own it. And let them react, you respond. Let me tell you something that might sting a little. The more you explain yourself, the more it sounds like you are making excuses. Now I know that hard to hear. Especially if you pride yourself on being thoughtful, on communicating well, on wanting people to understand where you are coming from. But hear me out. There is a point when explaining turns into scrambling, into over talking, into trying so hard to prove your good intent that the message underneath gets lost. And what's left out? Confusion, even suspicion. Because here is what people actually hear. When you start stacking reasons, you are trying to convince me, and notice, certain you are hoping I'll believe you. And the moment the doubt enters the room, it's hard to get it out. I think that giving someone a detailed backstory, all the voice in what happened was, I didn't mean it like that, will help clear things up. But what it really does is muddy the waters. It opens more doors for someone to question you, interrupt you, twist your words or poke holes in what you just said. You end up giving them material they didn't even ask for. You with your own cross examiner, and it isn't because you are wrong, it's not because you don't have a valid point. It's because when you explain too much, it shifts the power. It makes it look like you are trying to win them over. And people can smell them. You can ignore that people respect clarity. Calm. Someone who says something once firmly, clearly and without the need to dress it up. Let me give you an example. Imagine someone says to you, I feel like you were avoiding my yesterday. The knee-jerk response is to jump into, no, I wasn't. I just had a lot going on. My phone died and I had to pick up the kids. And that defense, that explanation, that's an invitation for the other person to dig deeper, to question whether that's really the reason. But if you say, I was not avoiding you and stop right there, that's a boundary, that's a statement. It's clarity, and clarity doesn't beg, doesn't apologize when it doesn't need to. It stands on its own because you're not trying to believe, you're just telling the truth. That's a powerful shift. See, when you rely on explanation to feel understood, you're constantly handling people the power to accept or reject you. You're basically saying, here's why I did what I did. Please validate it, but you don't need that. You don't need validation to speak truth. You don't need acceptance to set a boundary. You don't need permission to be clear. The word tells us that over communication is maturity, that talking it out is always the right thing. But the truth is, over communicating can be a mask. It can hide your insecurity. And most of the time, we are not really trying to solve the problem. You're trying to protect how you are perceived. You're trying to protect our image. But your image isn't your job. Your integrity is. So, what if instead of taking explanations, you got comfortable with being misunderstood? What if you didn't rush to correct every wrong impressions? What if your focus was less on how people are interpret you, more on how you carry yourself? That's not ego, that's a strength. That's groundness, and it changes everything. Especially when you are in a high stakes moment, because the people who are most in control of the room aren't the ones talking the most. They're the ones saying the least, but meaning every word. They don't feel silent just to feel safe. They don't need to over describe or justify. They speak with clarity, and then they let the silence do its job. So if you find yourself explaining, stop and ask, who am I trying to convince? Them or me? And if the answer is we, then maybe what you need isn't better explanation. Maybe you just need to believe yourself first. That's the kind of clarity no one can shake. Here is something most people miss in the heat of an argument or a tough conversation. When you start defending yourself, you're no longer telling your story. You're stuck inside tears, and that's where you lose. Because the moment you begin defending, you accepted a silent agreement that the version of the story is the one we are working with. That's the assumption we are framing. The logic is the starting point. And now you are scrambling to rearrange your narrative instead of standing in your own. Let me break that down. Say someone accuses you of being selfish. You didn't even think about how this would affect me. And what do we usually do? We jump into trying to prove them wrong. That's not true. I have always considered you. I only made the decision because I thought it was best for both of us. And on and on, it sounds reasonable. It sounds fair, but in doing that, you're playing their game. You're viewing from as inside their frame. You have accepted that the situation was selfish. Now you're just trying to explain why it wasn't. And when you argue from inside someone else's frame, you are already boxed in. There's no room to move. Because everything you say now is colored by the assumption you are agreed to by defending yourself. And when you do that long enough, you start to lose track of what actually happened, not just in their eyes but in your own. This is how you get pulled off center. This is how conversation that should take 5 minutes spiral into argument that take 5 days. Because now you are not discussing what happened, you are navigating what they think it meant, or in a maze they built with rules they made up. And no matter how well you argue, you never quite get out. And it's not because you are wrong, and it's not because you're right. It's not because you don't have a valid point, but because you let someone else define what the conversation was. Before you even got a chance to speak, there is a better way. Instead of jumping into defense mode, pause, breathe, and then ask yourself, is it actually true or is this just how they feel? Because those two things aren't the same. Feelings are valid always, but they don't always tell the full story. And your job isn't to fix someone else's emotions. Your job is to be clear in your own. So when someone tries to drag you into their version of events, don't try to rework their narrative. Step outside to speak from your own. You aren't required to chase down every accusation and give it oxygen. You're allowed to stand grounded in what are. You're not to be true without running around, trying to patch holes in someone else's version. Think of it like this. If someone hands you a script and says, this is your role, now start defending yourself. You don't have to act it out. You can say, I don't agree with that version and let it sit. That's not being dismissive, that's being courteous. When people come at you emotionally with a blame or accusations, it's rarely about truth, it's about emotion, about power, about making sense of their own frustration. And if you start defending yourself, you give their frustration a spotlight. You give their feeling all the controls. But if you stay centered, if you stay in your narrative, you shift the whole dynamic. Now they have to come to you. Now they have to meet you in truth. Now drag you into drama. That's how you stay in the lead. Not by being louder or faster or more convincing, but by staying grounded. Because when you live in reaction, you give up authorship of your own experience. Yeah, you let someone else write your script. But when you stay grounded in your truth, not defensive, not aggressive, just clear, then you write the story. You set the tone, and the moment you set the tone, you take your power back. You thought that silence is awkward, that if you don't respond right away, you're losing that if you pause too long. People will think you don't know what you are doing or worse that you are guilty. So we fill the space we rush in with words, explanations, reactions. But here's the truth most people overlook. Silence is strength, stillness is control. Because when things get tensed, when someone comes at you emotionally, when the energy in the room shifts, when the tone softens, the person who stays calm first wins. Not because it's a competition, but because